At our summer camp, every year we have a class called the Robert Welch Heritage. And as camp director, I'd like to get somebody who has known the founder of the John Birch Society. And sometimes I'm able to do that with John McManus. I had Charlie Everett one year, and I thought, gee, maybe Hid Welch knows something about the Robert Welch. So, Hid, would you like to? This class was given on a Friday morning after a long week, and it was a hot day. And you can imagine people from 12 to 16 to 17 may be a little bit tired. You know, it's been a long week, and his presentation, you could drop a pin in the room. So I was very, very impressed. And we were going to tape it, but the recorder ran out of battery or something. So we're recording this now for posterity. And I think it was also done at the 50th anniversary. So, Hid.
Thank you, Hal. I appreciate that. Before I get into the actual talk, I'd like to acknowledge Jack McManus, who is a golfing buddy. Not too long ago, Jack and I went out to play golf, and we were really astounded by the fact that we could finally shoot our age. We'd only gone 5 holes. Jack and I are looking forward to doing it again. At least I am. However, all of you know my father's name, and I am the second son of Robert Welch, which makes me a son of a Bircher. And I was asked to give a talk on the heritage, or the Robert Welch heritage. Well, one of the things that I looked up was the dictionary, because I wasn't familiar with the full definition of the word heritage. So I changed the title. Let's see if I can get this to work right. To Growing Up with Dad. Yeah. And one of the things you need to know about my father was that he was born very young. In fact, so young that he graduated from college when he was only 16. And that's not a joke. He entered the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill at the age of 12. And 4 years later, graduated in the class of 1916. Yeah. From there, he went on to the Naval Academy. That was at Annapolis, and he stayed there 2 years, and we were at the time of preparing for World War I. After completing 2 years and the war was ending, he applied for and was granted permission to withdraw honorably, since he did not want or was interested in a Navy career. He then went on to Harvard Law School, where he tangled with a professor named Felix Frankfurter. Yeah. Professor Frankfurter turned out to be a confirmed socialist who told his students that labor and management were always in opposition and conflict, and it would be ever thus. Well, Dad didn't agree with that at all. He disagreed rather vehemently, stating that they are both part of the same production capability and thus work together. Dad refused to accept Frankfurter's premise and statements, and he ultimately left Harvard to go into business. We'll get into that a little bit later. So the title, though it was given to me as the Robert Welch Heritage, I changed it, and after I looked up the word heritage, I found several things. Now the heritage, there are other definitions. The very first thing I came across was that it's property that descends to an heir. Well, Dad didn't leave me any actual property, or as such, so that was out. So then I looked up, and the next definition was legacy, inheritance, or tradition. Well, that was more like it. So what is my inheritance? Well, it will appear that it was all intangible, but let me assure you that it was substantive, and thus more valuable in many respects than any other legacy you could receive. Far more valuable than property goods or material goods. The inheritance was and still is the principles for which he stood. That's the legacy. And he was willing to fight for them. These are not necessarily in the order of importance, but starting with the one he continuously espoused, they are education. Let's see if we got this right. Yeah, okay. Dad felt that education was critical and was the only way. And if you're members of the John Birch Society, you know that it's dedicated to education as the fundamental and primary tool with which you can accomplish great things. He believed that knowledge is the source. Whoops, what do we got here? Knowledge was the source or foundation for all other capabilities. For the citizens, he believed in Jefferson's statement, quote, "I know of no safe depository of the ultimate powers of the society but the people themselves. And if we think them not enlightened enough to exercise their control with a wholesome discretion, the remedy is not to take it from them, but to inform their discretion." End quote. Even the communists and the New World Order and their elite of the CFR, the Council on Foreign Relations, and the United Nations talk about education. But their purpose is control. Through directed education, not freeing the mind of the individual to think for him or herself, rather to mold the individual to do their bidding, to accept whatever they say as correct and to be followed. The second point, integrity. Intellectual honesty, moral fiber, and character. They all combine in the real person who has integrity. The beauty of telling the truth is that you don't have to have a good memory. That's where integrity starts. It's the truth, even when it hurts. It has been said, and Dad would agree, that a person's integrity is determined when no one is looking. Another word for it is concentration, focus. I've been in business a long time, and as an aside, I can tell you that I've seen more businesses fail because they lose their focus. And we've got three giants in this country that lost their focus quite some time back, and they're failing. And they should be allowed to do so, please. Going back to focus, another would be dedication. An old golf saying says, "When you travel through life, young man, keep your eye upon the ball and not upon the hole." We next go to organization. If you aren't organized, you won't get where you want to go. Whether it's in business, personal life, the profession, or politics. Line in nature is not found. Unit and universe are round. The John Birch Society is testimony to his idea of organization and the critical part it plays in pursuing legitimate purposes regardless of the blocks and confrontation encountered as it seeks to grow and educate. And the fifth was energy. Dad had boundless energy. You're better off working than loafing. Human nature requires that the body, and especially the mind, work. As a kid growing up, my maternal grandfather used to razz me, saying that I liked work so well I could lie right down beside it and go to sleep. Well, that was certainly never the case with Dad. Dad worked 16 hours a day, almost every day of his life. He did have the ability to catnap, and that was done wherever he was, thus renewing the energy for the next extended work session. We'd have him come out to our house for dinner. He'd fall asleep on the couch between the time we were starting and the time we were ending. What else did I inherit? Well, I inherited an appreciation of many things. Perhaps most of all, and I'm going to list them here: math, history, science, poetry, travel, sports. You just changed it. Most important of all was the excitement of learning more. In short, Dad and our mother made sure that my brother and I were exposed to all kinds of subjects, ideas, views, what have you. Nothing was beyond the realm of possibility or not worth trying. And to show you how far afield this can go, I became a figure skater as a result of seeing the Shipstead and Johnson ice follies one year. And I decided that those with figure skates could do more than I could with my hockey skates. So I asked for and received a pair of figure skates for Christmas. Well, the result? Skating lessons, competition, and finally, after World War II, when I returned, I had a partner, and we went on to win skating medals. I do hold the New England Championship and the Eastern Championship in figure skating in pairs. It's an old title, but I still respect it.
Wow.
The real point is that I was allowed to go my own way, so long as it was constructive and not harmful to anyone else, and it would not interfere with my school, and was an honest endeavor. The best way to learn, Dad always felt, was the printed word. He wasn't much on television. In fact, he didn't think it was a very good idea. He was a throwback in that sense. But the printed word was his idea of how you learned everything. Excuse me, I'm not getting this, okay. And his first thought was be a skeptic. He was a natural skeptic, and he undoubtedly developed that along with his interest in math. As such, he didn't accept much without some proof that he found reasonable and mathematically sound. This was why he tangled with one of his law professors, Felix Frankfurter. Professor Frankfurter presented the concept that labor and management were and would always be in conflict, a continuous battle. Dad disagreed with that vehemently, said so, and refused to accept it. Dad claimed that it was only through production that we achieve a better life and an improved standard of living, and that meant management and labor working together. Dad's attitude toward anything socialistic was that it was destructive of the individual and his or her productivity. It works towards the lowest common denominator, never the highest, and it always produces scarcity. If you look at any socialist economy, you recognize that two things are at work, one of which is control, and they can call it anything else they want, but it's still control, and it always results in rationing of some form, scarcity of the goods, whereas a free society produces an abundance. As a consequence, Dad said he would rather have 1 million salesmen trying to sell the overproduction of a free society than 1 million ration clerks trying to divide the too little that the collectivist systems always provide. Once on a trip to Iowa, when we were living in Indiana, I went riding with Dad. He was on his way to a candy jobber to whom he wanted to sell some candy. I asked him how he happened to get into the candy business. In typical mathematical fashion, he told me that the precise logic he pursued in finding a product that was consumed and replaced both regularly and frequently. This led him to think about such things as soap, food in general, and disposable products. He added one additional ingredient to his thinking, namely that whatever the product was, it should be something that an individual would enjoy and probably want more of. This brought the conclusion, getting one thing here, excuse me, the candy. Some of you may recognize these candy items because some of them are still on the market. But these were ones that were created over the span of Dad's lifetime. Well, the candy sounded, and the explanation he gave was very logical, constructive to my young mind. Then he hit me with the final statement, besides, your mother loved candy. So even with all his mathematical and logical processes, emotion played a concluding part in his decision. Well, Dad created the first chocolate-covered fudge in the world, and that's so far as we know. He came upon this idea as a way to preserve the freshness of newly made fudge, which was what my mother really liked.
Yeah.
Normally fudge, such as you would make at home, will go hard and begin to grain out within a matter of a few days, 3 at the most. It's a natural happening because the sugar attempts to revert to its natural state of granular form. Dad discovered that by coating the fudge with something that would insulate it, which was chocolate in this case, the fudge center was kept from the air and thus would not grain anywhere near as rapidly. The result, he then had a candy bar that had a shelf life of approximately 6 months rather than 3 days. And that was the founding of the Welch fudge bar.
That's right.
At the time, as a chocolate-covered fudge item, it was the largest selling fudge bar in the world.
Yeah.
He also created the all-day sucker, or lollipop,
Yeah.
and that was called Sugar Daddy.
Yeah.
Even though the companies he started and the one for which he subsequently worked are long gone, some of those candies are still around. Junior Mints is made today by, I believe it's Tootsie Roll, which is run by a lady who has been very successful in maintaining that company. Another item in Dad's kit, and I've never been a great chess player, but Dad was. But he did make certain that my brother and I knew how to play the game, and we did so during our growing up years. We were exposed to many well-known national chess players, both at home and at the Boston City Club. Dad would go there to play in a tournament every so often, and he would take us in and we would watch what was going on, sometimes referred to as a sitzkrieg. You sat there for hours waiting for something to happen, somebody to make a move. And watching players sit for hours before moving a chess piece 2 places on the board is not what you would call an exciting afternoon, certainly not for a teenager. However, if you understand the game and the strategies that each player was developing, you begin to appreciate the thought that's involved. Many chess players had what is called photographic memories. They could picture in their mind the entire board and all the positions and every move made by a piece at any time throughout the entire game. In this respect, one of the greatest such individuals that Dad told us about was a gentleman named Pillsbury. No relationship to the flower people or anything like that. But Pillsbury could stand on a bridge with a mile-long freight train going by and look at it as it went by, moving at the rate of a Mach 60 miles an hour. When the train had gone by, he could stand there and recite the serial numbers on every car,
Wow.
forward or backward, starting at any particular point and going to either end at request.
Amazing. Great.
That was a perfect demonstration of a photographic memory. Needless to say, such a feat made a big impression on me, or I wouldn't have remembered it. But it also reinforced Dad's point about the capacity of the human brain. One of Dad's closest chess friends turned out to be a concert pianist as well. And he would often come out to the house on a Sunday, and we would be given a lesson in chess, but at the same time he would play the piano for us. And we had a thoroughly enjoyable afternoon listening to this gentleman who really could have been a concert pianist of world renown, but thought he could be a better chess player, and wrote a book called White to Play and Win. And if you know chess at all, the white moves first. And he felt, and he wrote the book to prove his point that because white makes the first move, white can control the board throughout the rest of the play. There were a lot of people who disputed that, but at any rate, that was his idea. And coming back to the music, Dad loved the old Negro spirituals. One of his favorites was the Battle Hymn of the Republic. And at one point in our career, he had my wife and I record that for him. I never knew what he did with the recording, but it was fun doing it, and we enjoyed it. But part of my legacy, as I said, was the love of learning. I have found it exciting, enjoyable, and consuming. While I do not have anywhere near the education that Dad did, I do have more knowledge in a number of subjects, especially mechanics and science, than he ever did. Dad was not mechanical in any sense, nor was he a cook. Excuse me. It was often said that he could not boil water without burning it. That's not quite true, since he did learn how to make candy, and that required some cooking.
That's right.
However, it was in the area of the math that we exchanged many ideas and discussions. Many of these took place during dinner, since we always had very interesting and broad-based conversations at that particular meal. No subject was beyond reach, and books were often brought to the table for reference purposes. We were also subjected to learning Spanish at the dinner table, and that was long before the Hispanic-Mexican invasion of our Southwest. While I do not speak Spanish today, I can understand much of it and read a fair amount. Again, instilling the learning to syndrome has caused me to learn other languages. In fact, I learned to speak French before I did English. That was because my mother, at Dad's behest and approval, had taken me and my brother to Paris, where she could study at the Sorbonne in the Napoleonic era. While she was in class, we had a French governess who spoke no English, so you can imagine the results. Returning to the legacy aspect and Dad's natural skepticism, I caught the bug, particularly where it related to politics, and as a result, I have never belonged to a political party, preferring to remain independent, and that is still true today. Dad had made the point many times that the individual was more important than the party or the label. I have therefore always tried to evaluate the candidates as individuals, looking at their record, their statements, and most importantly, their actions. Dad, as I think I mentioned, had boundless energy and determination that knew no end. Regardless of the task, if it was worth doing, it should be undertaken with two thoughts in mind. Know as much as you can about what you are doing, and do it right. Turning to another part of Dad's activities and my heritage, we talk about a noble profession, salesmanship. Dad was a salesman all his life. I've been a salesman all my life. I'm going to die a salesman. Despite everything that has been said and written about it, it is a noble profession. And in this, I agree wholeheartedly with Dad. It is probably the single most important profession there is, because it is basic, if not, it is a basic, if not the primary method of educating people. Having an idea is worthless until it is communicated to someone and brought into being and fruition. A true and honest salesman is a good communicator who educates his customer or prospect to the benefits of the product or service he is selling. As a salesman, Dad was better at employing facts than persuasion. He could slay his opponents with facts and not much charisma, but he sure could slay them with the facts. And this was true in his foray into the political arena as well. Without the charisma of the average politician, Dad relied on his knowledge and intellect to persuade his audience of the merits of his position. He would literally slay them with facts, well beyond that of his opponents. And I well remember attending one of his political debates when his opponent challenged Dad's facts and said that Dad was mistaken as to his understanding of the government bureau, a specific government bureau they were talking about at that particular time. Whereupon Dad interrupted him by retrieving from his briefcase the entire organizational chart of that particular department and holding it up for the audience. End of debate. One evening during a typical discussion, we got into the subject of knowledge itself. And before I get to that, I would like to point out that I'm standing here in front of you with a shirt, tie, and jacket on because in my home growing up, neither my brother nor I were ever allowed to come to the dinner table without this attire. This was our costume, our uniform, or whatever you want to call it. But Dad was very strict on that, and if we attempted to show up even in a hot summer's afternoon or evening without it, we were sent from the table to get it, then come back. One evening when we were doing this sort of thing at the dinner table, we got into the trilogy, the truth of the trilogy, the known, the unknown, and the unknowable. As Dad explained it, we have a large body of the known, the facts that we can see, feel, or understand, and which we use all the time. This is a constantly growing area. And then we have the unknown. Those are the areas where we may have ideas, but are not able to prove them or use them at this time. In the field of science, we are constantly probing the area of the unknown. Basic research is concerned with the unknown and is continuously pushing back that frontier and moving subjects into the area of the known. Then we come to the unknowable, sometimes difficult to define, but let's start with the universe. We can speculate as to its origins. We can examine aspects of it, but when it comes right down to it, there are many elements that are unknowable, at least so far as our knowledge goes today. Again, even what appears to be the unknowable is breached at times and moves into the knowable realm and perhaps even into the known. The discovery of certain laws of nature fall into this realm since they were considered unknowable in ancient times. Dad considered travel as an educational experience. In one aspect, he considered it both broadening and exciting because it was a part of the learning process. And one summer, our family took a 13,000-mile trip around the United States. That was in 1940, and we did it in 6 weeks. Saw such magnificent natural wonders as the Grand Canyon, Carlsbad Caverns, Yosemite, and Yellowstone, to name just a few. When you travel 13,000 miles in 6 weeks back in 1940, if you remember the road structure at that time, that's quite a trek.
Yeah.
Quite something. We all learn from this experience, and our memories are still bright with the knowledge gained. As you descend the Grand Canyon, on muleback, please, you can actually see the centuries in the strata of rock as cut by the Colorado River. And here is a picture of the family at the Walnut Tree out in California, where we stopped for the picture, as you can see, of the 4 of us.
Huge tree.
While Dad enjoyed entertainment, the theater and some concerts, he believed you learned more and better through reading than any other way. And perhaps that's what brought on the book, The Romance of Education. If you're not familiar with it, it is a book that Dad wrote to talk about the excitement of learning and the benefits of education again. Dad enjoyed the excitement of a challenge, and here is one with which he tangled at great length for quite some time, and he filled page after page after page of notebooks with respect to it. This is Fermat's last theorem, and Fermat is supposed to have written in the margin of one of his books that he had discovered an answer to this, or proved the theorem. The basic theorem is that x plus n to y plus to the n is equal to z to the n is true only when n is 2. Anything above that, and it's not true. Now, many scientists have worked very hard on this over the century, and it has been, I believe, according to something I read recently, proven now through the use of the computer, because the permutations and combinations reach into the billions, and to be able to sort them out becomes physically impossible without the computer. At any rate, Dad struggled with it for a long time, and I think I still have some of the files that he generated as a result. Dad was a pack rat too, in that sense. He was a pack rat with books because he loved them. Dad had a love of poetry, and that ranged far and wide, and he exposed my brother and me to much of it, and many an evening we would have him quote poetry.